A major city is banning evictions over unpaid rent, and meanwhile, another major city is ending its eviction moratorium. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have two interesting articles for you today, and it's going over, obviously, the topic of evictions and the whole eviction moratorium nonsense. Now, we have one major city that has decided to ban evictions over unpaid rent, and I believe it's under a certain dollar amount. And then we have another major city that's ending its eviction moratorium. So another one of these local eviction moratoriums is finally ending, and it's never too soon, okay? With all of the stuff winding down from the pandemic, all the restrictions going away, there really is no reason for any local municipality, in my opinion, to have one of these still in place and then claim that it has to do with the health crisis, okay? Now, I honestly believe that no eviction moratorium was ever legal, was ever constitutional, but if they are using the logic of, well, this is a health emergency, well, the emergency phase has ended, according to them, and they've eased up on all the mask requirements and all the other requirements that they've had. So you need to end these local eviction moratoriums and get back to normal business. All the other businesses have been allowed to reopen, have been allowed to get back to business, but landlords have been, it seems like we've been personally punished in a lot of cases, okay? Now, obviously throughout most of the country, the state and the federal eviction moratoriums are over, but these small municipalities, these local governments still are holding on, it's like, in this nonsense, like I was saying in one of my other videos, in Los Angeles, theirs is going on until 2023. This is how ridiculous it is. Now, I believe somebody should step in and be like, hey, this isn't working. This isn't a good idea for the long term, and we need to end it. But hey, what can I say? But anyway, back on the story about the city that's banning evictions, over unpaid rent. This is insane, okay? And I don't know what their logic is, but that isn't the only restriction that they're putting in place. They've added other new tenant protections as well. And obviously, this is one of the more left-leaning, more progressive, anti-landlord places. So it shouldn't be too surprising. Now, before I get into the articles, though, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? Do you think that these local eviction protections, that basically ban landlords from evicting tenants over unpaid rent, do you think that is a good long-term solution? Do you think that, that there could be a constitutional challenge here? I mean, what is a landlord supposed to do? Okay, if they tie their hands and tell them, hey, you can't evict over this, then what are you supposed to do? This is insane, okay? And it blows my mind that a city would even put that into place. Oh man, this is ridiculous. This is how far some of these places have gone. Basically, they want landlords to become the social housing providers, okay? And that's not our duty. It never was. And the real people that it's hurting are the small mom and pop landlords. And especially in these major cities where you'll have, somebody who they own a duplex, right? They live in one side, and then in the other side, they might have a tenant. And guess what? That tenant decides, I don't want to pay rent anymore, and you can't get rid of them. And then you have this combative situation where you live, with a tenant who doesn't like you and you don't like the tenant and you don't get along. And it would be great if you could just say, well, I'm just not going to renew this person's lease because we don't get along. But you can't, you can't do that because according to the law, you don't even have rights to your own property. But anyway, let's get into this first article. And it's coming from DCist.com, and it says, DC bans evictions over unpaid rent of less than $600. And they are limiting it to, unpaid rent under $600. But I think that's a slippery slope, okay? I think that if you say any dollar amount that you are owed and you can't, evict over that, then there's a huge issue. Now, I realize that most of the time, it'll accumulate and then, the amount will go up. But why can't you just jump on it before there's a bigger problem? Okay. Basically what they're saying is landlords need to lose thousands of dollars before they can finally get rid of this bad tenant. And I'm like, no, why can't we get rid of them early so that we don't have to worry about it? But anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. In a unanimous vote on Tuesday, the D.C. Council permanently barred landlords from filing evictions against tenants who owe less than $600, sealed some eviction records, and further protected voucher holders during the rental screening process in an omnibus tenant protection bill. At least 2 council members noted that the bill is one of the strongest and most comprehensive bills in the country related to tenant protections in some time. Many of the provisions in the bill were already in place, but limited to the public health emergency. For example, D.C. Superior Court already sealed the eviction records of several 100,000 people due to emergency legislation passed during the pandemic, according to Legal Aid DC. We know that when folks have records of eviction cases, even if they didn't end in evictions, that can prevent those people from finding a new housing in the future, says Mel Zond, senior staff attorney in the Housing Law Unit. Well, here's my gripe with that, okay? You seal the eviction records because it didn't end in eviction. That doesn't mean that the tenant, was paying on time or the tenant didn't violate the terms of the eviction. Okay? Just because you drop your eviction case doesn't mean that. That doesn't even mean that they got to stay in the place. What could have easily happened was the tenant, realizing that they would lose, went and they worked out a deal with the landlord to drop their eviction case and they would just leave or pay a small amount or whatever. And so this could be a very, very bad tenant up in a unit who's had multiple evictions filed against them, because most of them do. Okay, they have these problems over and over again wherever they live, a lot of them. Okay, and now the landlord can't screen and see, hey, this person has an eviction on their record. Hey, this person really has a history of not paying their rent on time. Hey, this person is not a good tenant. And so now you've taken away the ability for landlords to figure that out. Now, in terms of the stopping evictions of less than $600, this is, like I said, it's a slippery slope. And it'll start at $600. Next thing you know, it'll be $1,000. Next thing you know, it'll be $5,000. And next thing you know, all evictions over unpaid rent will be banned. That's why don't you give them an inch, they go a mile. Okay, don't let this slide. This is ridiculous. Now, Washington D.C. obviously is one of the most left-leaning, progressive, anti-landlord places in the entire country. So it doesn't surprise me that they would be one of the people who put in this ridiculous amount of tenant protections. Okay, and yeah, landlords they're not really doing that hot. Okay, so honestly, this is one of the places where I wouldn't invest in real estate. And part of it is, I heard that they also have that rule where the tenant has the first right of refusal if you decide to sell your property. Now, that is ridiculous as well. That can completely screw up your property rights in terms of buying and selling real estate. I hate these kind of laws. I hate dealing with this kind of thing. And yeah, the properties are worth a lot. Yeah, you might get a ton of appreciation on it, right? But with all these rent control policies, all these eviction protection policies, etc., you're just going to be going through a nightmare the entire time you own it. Okay, but anyway, let's get into our second article. Like I was saying, another major city has ended its local eviction moratorium, and this one's coming out of WBZNewsRadio.iheart.com, and it says, Boston eviction moratorium to be lifted at the end of March. All right, so it should be pretty obvious. Boston is the city that's ending their eviction moratorium. So let's get into the article. Alongside the announcement that masks would no longer be required for most indoor spaces in Boston starting Saturday, the Boston Public Health Commission also said that the eviction moratorium in the city will be sunset on March 31st. The temporary order, introduced in August of 2021, was partly put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19, as officials feared evictions would lead to a potential spread as residents move in with family or friends in other accommodations. Yeah, that's the same BS excuse that they've been using for a long time. Well, people moving around. Well, unless you can literally stop the movement of people, you couldn't stop the spread by, it's illogical to say, well, evictions they were the only thing that would have spread the virus. Especially by August of 2021. The whole pandemic thing had been going on for over a year, and they didn't realize at that point that people were still moving around, and even if they got to stay in the same house, that didn't stop the spread of the virus. I mean, it's so ridiculous, some of these rules they put in place. Like, they didn't use any logic whatsoever. They were just like, well, people, they should wear these bandanas over their face and that'll protect them. And then they find out that, hey, that's just not true. Well, people, if they get evicted, if they have to move from one house to another, then they're more likely to spread it. And I was like, yeah, but those people would have still gone over to that other house, whether they moved in there or not. So they would have spread it anyway. It's just illogical. And thank goodness that this kind of stuff is ending. But let's continue. According to the order, BPHC Executive Director Bizola Ojekutu had determined that time-limited measures would be necessary to sunset the moratorium, giving tenants and agencies reasonable notice to allow them to mitigate. With cases dropping in the city, landlords possessing an execution were recommended to give the city notice to assist tenants in seeking other housing options. Unless a serious violation of terms has occurred, landlords were ordered not to issue eviction notices until the end of March. So yeah, here we are once again. Another major city eviction moratorium has ended. Thank goodness. Now, this is a long time coming, but we are almost to the point where there are no eviction moratoriums, no pandemic-related eviction moratoriums throughout the entire country. Now, obviously, some of these places have put in, their own long-term eviction protections that mimic these, pandemic-related eviction moratoriums. But for now, it looks like this stuff is finally coming to an end.